But that's all relating to the plot of the movies. Now let's talk about character. On screen, it seemed like Anakin turned very quickly from remorse,
what have I done,
to child murder.
Hard disagree. As I've explained many times before, the dark path is a gradual one, of sinking lower and lower until you don't even recognize the terrible things you have done anymore. In other words,
it is such a quiet thing to fall, but far more terrible is to admit it.
Now, we did see key moments of Anakin's fall in the prequels, like when he slaughtered the Tusken Raiders.
Yeah, I think the dude was more capable of killing younglings if he was more capable of killing Tusken Raiders regardless of age.
But in Revenge of the Sith, after he finds out Palpatine is an evil Sith Lord, who, by the way, looks really damn evil, he turns on a dime.
Yeah, another thing that people ignore. Imagine your own father, or father figure, turning out to be the worst guy imaginable, responsible for a destructive war and whatnot, and let's see how you cope with that. Yeah, Palps groomed Anakin for a reason, you know.
On screen, only 7 minutes and 8 seconds pass between this...
You're the Sith Lord.
And this.
Yeah, I think you missed the very obvious detail that Anakin did not cut Mace Windu's hand off out of malice, but because he thought Palpatine was his only chance of saving Padme. I imagine a lot of his actions afterwards were based on the fact that, holy shit, I just killed Mace Windu. There's no way in hell I'll be forgiven for this. And so the only practical choice now is to make a pact with the devil. Pretty much. Yeah, I think it demonstrates how one mistake or lapse in judgment can take you down the dark path. Because how do you go back from that? You obviously didn't intend to kill Mace Windu, but what's done can never be undone. Anyways, all you've done pretty much is remind me of why I love these movies. So you're a pretty incompetent analyst, Ryan.
That is an abrupt transition, and it takes us right into Anakin killing kids and declaring,
from my point of view, the Jedi are evil.
What I said previously stands. Moving on.
But the Clone Wars provides a much deeper understanding of why Anakin believed that and what led him to turn on Mace Windu. In the show, Anakin loses faith in the Jedi over time. Anakin becomes a soldier, and he spends every day exposed to violence.
I don't think you need the Clone Wars show to tell you that. Maybe watch the battle-hardened Anakin as seen in Revenge of the Sith, maybe?
So, throughout the war, he begins to see violence as a way to solve his problems, even if it's not technically the Jedi way. He kills Tal Merrick from behind, not very honorable. He also kills Admiral Trench in cold blood.
I also remember those two murders being hand-waved away, especially the first one, where it's played for humor. Yeah, another criticism I've had of TCW is that the show seems to think we should be presenting Anakin as a role model, which is so backwards and against the original point of his character.
And he even uses Vader's iconic Force choke to kill Separatists.
Yeah, I remember that being hand-waved away after the fact too. And honestly, it was much more powerful seeing Anakin use the Force choke on his own wife than it was to some bug. Even if the context was, I gotta save Ahsoka. But given my general apathy towards Ahsoka, well, yeah.
When you see Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars series, it's a lot easier to imagine this guy becoming Darth Vader.
Yeah, because an emotionally unstable hothead didn't do it for you. You're kidding me, right? Tell me you're joking.
Also, Anakin's relationship with Padme becomes richer and more nuanced through this series. We see that he becomes jealous of her friendships with other men.
Padme wasn't even friends with Clovis anymore, dude. Yeah, I think I hate the fact that I remember the show better than most of the fanboys who praise it like the second coming of Jesus, but also say you should skip season 1, or that they didn't actually watch every episode.
Which leads into the idea that he sees Padme as a thing that he can possess and control. And this is how George Lucas described Anakin's fall.
You're allowed to love people, but you're not allowed to possess them.
And people think I'm selective on when I listen to George Lucas, given they try to tell me constantly that George created the show or whatever. Yeah, well, he had just as much involvement with the holiday special, or even The Force Unleashed. That doesn't say much.
We also see how the Jedi's mistakes with Anakin make him more susceptible to being manipulated by Palpatine. The Council deceives Anakin into believing that Obi-Wan had died just so they could complete a mission.
I prefer when Anakin thought Obi-Wan died during the Battle of Jabim, and his surrogate master Ki-Adi-Mundi had some really unproductive advice when it came to Anakin grieving his loss.
They also refused to help neutral planets when they were in need, and all of this makes Anakin see the Jedi Council as a lying body that he cannot trust.
At this rate, I feel like Ryan is describing the bare minimum rather than some actual insightful expansion. And by the way, I'm really sick of watching this video.
But the defining moment of the Clone Wars series was when Ahsoka was framed for murder and the Jedi Council turned their backs on her.
Oh yeah, I remember how stupid that arc was. The fact that Ahsoka was accused of bombing the temple when she wasn't even on Coruscant, that Barriss betrayed her for no reason, and that part where Barriss somehow managed to doctor fake AI-generated footage of Ahsoka killing her accomplice. Yeah, that wasn't very well written, and I hate how artificial it was too. That Ahsoka was made out to be some bonus reason Anakin became disillusioned with the Jedi, it was a cheap manipulative trick.
Anakin realized the Jedi were too embroiled in Senate politics to protect one of their own.
Yeah, and they were too stupid to put two and two together that Ahsoka wasn't even on Coruscant when the bombing happened. That she was clearly focused on the battle on another planet to have been the culprit. You know, why am I questioning the logical consistency of the baby show that they play over at Weenie Hut Juniors?
After Ahsoka's name is cleared, she decides to leave the Order, and this makes Anakin grow especially bitter against the Jedi Council. In context, this explains why he said,
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
He saw the Jedi Council as a corrupt body.
No, the fuck it doesn't.
The Clone Wars also breathed new life into Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now in the movies, he's very much a stoic Jedi whose inexperience at training an apprentice partially leads to Anakin's fall. But he doesn't really have a character arc in these movies, and frankly, it's kind of a waste of a charming actor like Ewan McGregor.
You're not gonna tell me that TCW of all stories gave Obi-Wan a compelling arc.
But the Clone Wars gave Obi-Wan a love interest, Satine Kryze.
Yeah, I'll be the first to point out the expanded universe did that too. Who the fuck do you think Siri Tachi is? You know what? Don't answer that. I know reading isn't your strong suit.
Now this was a controversial idea.
Yeah, because they not only disregarded the OG, but also fucked over the Mandalorians needlessly to do it.
But it gives the character so much nuance and lets us see Anakin's fall in a whole new light.
They didn't need to screw over Mandalorians to do this.
Now, when Obi-Wan was a young man, he and Qui-Gon were assigned to protect Satine, just like Anakin protects Padme in Attack of the Clones. The two fall for each other, but they are too committed to duty to act on their feelings.
I really hated that Satine's duty was dedicated to pacifying the Mandalorians.
Now, this shows us that any Jedi can be tempted, and it makes Anakin's fall all the more tragic.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the point with Anakin was that being inducted into the Jedi Order late, and already having certain worldviews, he was much less prepared for being a Jedi, making him easier to fall into temptation and desires and whatnot. That's why Obi-Wan doesn't have this problem, for example. Now, obviously, external stories show that all the Jedi go through trials and tribulations. But in the context of the self-contained story of the Star Wars saga, Anakin is the odd one out, and he, at the same time, had a harder time dealing with his emotions. I guess if there's one positive about these terrible TCW shill videos, it's that they force me to defend my position on why I love the prequels.
But this also addresses a major prequel trilogy problem. Obi-Wan never reported his suspicions about Anakin and Padme to the Jedi Council.
Yeah, Obi-Wan not ratting out Anakin is a problem apparently.
So the prequels hinted that Obi-Wan knew the truth, you know, with Anakin flirting with Padme in front of Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones, and Obi-Wan acknowledging that she liked him.
She was pleased to see us.
I still don't understand what the issue is supposed to be. How does Obi-Wan not reporting Anakin break the story? Because when you actually assess the story, it shows how Anakin's relationship with Padme in part caused his downfall, because he was supposed to be a Jedi, but chose to pursue a relationship with Padme. And of course that led to Anakin being too afraid to lose her once the threat of her dying came to surface.
There's a cut monologue in Revenge of the Sith where Obi-Wan reveals that he knew the truth, and he also guesses immediately that Anakin was the father in Revenge of the Sith.
Anakin is the father, isn't he?
You are the father!
So, if Obi-Wan is such a rule-following Jedi Master, why did he not bring any of this information to the Council? Because he went through the same thing with his love of Satine.
We can't just assume Obi-Wan let it slide. I still don't understand how Obi-Wan overlooking their relationship screwed the story over. This just sounds like actively trying to find holes in the prequels, or TCW exploring something that makes the prequels better. In the latter case, it's pathetic as fuck.
Like the Clone Wars not only reveals that he once loved this woman, it shows us her tragic death.
Remember, my dear Obi-Wan.
So in that moment, as he's holding the only woman he ever loved,
go to hell.
Obi-Wan might have wished that he could go back and leave the Order to be with her. So in the prequels, he might have been happy that Anakin found love. Maybe he was even going to encourage Anakin to leave the Order after the war.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But the main difference between them was that Obi-Wan knew he had to choose one or the other, whereas Anakin decides that he wants to have it all.
And I'm also not convinced that the Clone Wars saved or fixed the prequels, especially when the Clone Wars had to retcon so much and pour so much artificial meaning into the story to do so.
Now let's talk about the Clone Troopers.
Oh boy.
So the name, the Clone Wars, really invokes the imagination. It makes you picture the Republic fighting against legions of clone soldiers. But in the movies, the clones turn out to be just as boring as droids. They're just lookalikes who hang around until it's time to turn on the Jedi.
Yeah, that's the point. Most of them are basically organic droids. Or at least that's how they were designed. It's explained in the movie, but people still treat this like the clones are underdeveloped, without realizing the context behind the clones, and also realizing that the saga isn't about them.
And their heel turn was also confusing. Like, were they waiting for Palpatine to tell them to turn? Was this always the plan? Did they know the entire time that they were going to kill the Jedi?
My answer would be sort of. The clones were conditioned to follow orders without question, so they were susceptible to obeying Order 66, and they knew what Order 66 meant, but they weren't deliberately told ahead of time that Order 66 specifically would be issued to them. It's kept vague, but it's clear in the movies that the clones were following orders, just like how they were made.
The movies don't really treat the clones as fully human, so they're not characters we care about.
Good thing Georgie Boy prioritized the actually important story over random clone troopers who were the direct prelude to stormtroopers. And guess how much characterization the stormtroopers got in the movies?
Absolutely nothing.
That should be enough to dispel this criticism. This is the sort of crap that would be relegated to books and shit.
But the show makes the clones some of the most compelling characters in the series. Troopers are given names, personalities, and story arcs.
And through that, the show misses the original meaning of the clones. I've said this a million times already, but I want to reiterate. You guys remember my video discussing how Germans feel about Indiana Jones and him beating up Nazis and whatnot? Most of which are German by nationality? Yeah, well, I got a lot of comments that clarified that a lot of people in Germany like to pretend that everyone opposed Silly Mustache Man secretly or whatever, when the reality is far darker. Germans both complied with the tyrant despite many major red flags, and were complicit in his crimes due to ignoring said red flags. Now, when it comes to the role the clones play in the movies, it's fascist at its extreme. The clones were conditioned to obey orders from the highest authority, no matter what they were. The clones, despite their conditioning, were still alive, and still chose to obey the order. We get proper expanded insight in something like the Battlefront 2 campaign, but the point is, TCW basically watered Order 66 down to, oh, they were brainwashed, what poor victims. And it undermines the story as a whole. It's a snowflake mentality I just demonstrated with Germans unable to accept that they followed a tyrant and followed him willingly in the past. It makes for an infinitely weaker story, and I've laid out my grievances like this, and why I prefer the old stuff.
The first inkling we get of clone independence is Cut, the clone who deserts the war to start a family.
And this whole change to the clones in general was extremely short-sighted in my opinion, because of that whole revisionism thing.
But we also see the clones in their training, when they're worried that they may not make the cut and they won't be able to serve the Republic. And this is especially tragic since we know the clones are being used and manipulated like property.
The only question is why they weren't designed like property. The practicality of the clone army is thrown completely out the window for the sake of humanizing them, without realizing the narrative purpose of the clones in the saga. That they just turned on the Jedi on a dime, and it highlighted a red flag that was overlooked, since Palpatine had the final top authority.
And yet, they are ultimately loyal to the Republic. And there's even defective clones like 99 who still want to serve the cause.
Yeah, I'm gonna be fair, 99 didn't age as badly as I thought he would. Something I don't understand, however, is given his age, why the hell was he not culled alongside other defective clones? I get that the Jedi stopped the Kaminoans from culling the clones if they came out wrong, but it should have been far too late for 99. Like a lot of things in TCW, he's an idea that exists out of telling the story without regard for practicality for the universe.
And Clone Captain Rex stands out as one of the greatest Star Wars characters of all time.
LOL.
We see him grow and evolve from Anakin's favorite clone commander into a mentor and friend to Ahsoka Tano.
Fuck the Rex-Soka shippers while you're at it.
But most importantly, the Clone Wars introduced the inhibitor chip.
Yeah, and I absolutely despised it.
Which revealed that the clones did not willingly betray the Jedi.
A cheap get-out-of-jail-free card once the Clone Wars dug itself into a hole with the question of, if the clones like the Jedi, why did they turn on them? From what it seems, the Clone Wars on top of all the retcons was not properly planned out as a complete beginning-to-end story, and this is the final result come Season 6.
They were programmed to turn on their commanders once Palpatine executed Order 66. So this altered the clone story by showing that they were victims and not villains.
Yeah, what I said about the undermining of the fascist symbolism stands, because the clones totally didn't want to. It was a kill switch that went off in their heads, y'all. Pathetic.
And it paved the way for great spin-offs like The Bad Batch.
Fucking what? No, seriously. Why is the bar always set at the fillery garbage and never the original, like Republic Commando?
In fact, the Clone Wars was the catalyst for a whole new Star Wars era that, for better or worse, would prioritize TV shows.
All of which are quantity over quality. I also love how he says for better or for worse. Basically confirming that the Disney Plus strategy has not resulted in better, up-to-par content, but rather repetitive, filler-ridden rage bait that thinks it's a lot more clever than it actually is. I love the old comics, especially the stuff from the 2000s, so seeing the Disney Plus shows not even touch that bar despite their insane advantages over ink on pages says a lot.
So let's talk about the legacy of this show and how I think it points a way forward for Lucasfilm in the next 10 years.
Let's hear it.
So The Clone Wars was a first of its kind release in 2008.
Ignoring the micro-series, of course. Yeah, that's the only way you're gonna prop up the Clone Wars. By ignoring everything else, it's bullshit.
Star Wars had always been a movie-focused franchise. An animated show set in the middle of a trilogy was an anomaly, and it changed the game.
Yeah, again, nothing remarkable or special. There was a cartoon and a multimedia project. Actually, several multimedia projects, like Shadows of the Empire, the OG Marvel comics, the spree of video game releases in the 2000s, etc., that did this job already and did it better.
In the 10-year gap between the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy, our only on-screen Star Wars were the Clone Wars and Rebels. Now, George Lucas attempted to start a live-action series called Star Wars Underworld, but couldn't overcome the budgetary limitations of TV.
Oh, so you just reminded me. When I'm done talking about young Indiana Jones in the future, I want to highlight why that show has aged better than the Clone Wars, despite the latter overshadowing the former in reputation. Keep your eyes peeled for that.
But then, when Disney attempted a return of films with the sequel trilogy, it didn't go well.
Don't tell me you're going to suggest what I think you're going to suggest.
Today, many fans see the sequels as Star Wars' worst movies, and some sequel trilogy actors seem to agree.
Oh, not this comparison with the prequels again. I've heard it a million times, and once again, false equivalence.
And Solo, a Star Wars story released in 2018, isn't generally considered much better.
That movie seemed to highlight how out of touch Disney was, that they actually thought out of all the characters in Star Wars, Han Solo was the most lucrative and rich for an origin story movie.
So following the sequel's backlash and criticism, Star Wars pivoted to focus on streaming shows. Since The Rise of Skywalker's 2019 debut, no new Star Wars movies have been released.
You know, I think that's honestly for the best. They'd probably be financial bombs anyways.
But in that time, we have seen 196 episodes of Star Wars TV.
God help us all.
Now, not every show did well, but many were better received than the sequel trilogy.
A low bar. And none of them actually suggested that Disney learned their lesson. What's your point here?
And some, like Andor and The Mandalorian, are arguably the best live-action Star Wars since the original trilogy.
But when you factor in comics, novels, video games, the whole shebang, they are knocked back by some stiff competition. I am goddamn sick of people pretending like the novels and comics don't exist, or genuinely being so ignorant or lazy that they don't factor them in because either they don't know what a Juris Kaboth is, or they think Crimson Empire is a piece of shit side story that don't matter and toss it to the side. You know, I'm wondering if I should fund a fan game or something based on Crimson Empire and make a PlayStation 1 style hack and slash or something to give that series more love.
The Clone Wars proved just how much Star Wars TV shows can fill in the gaps and improve the movies.
But when novels and comics can do that too, they're overlooked for one key reason. accessibility. Jesus. Sometimes do I wish these stories could fairly compete with each other.
But we might be seeing the end of Star Wars TV. Currently, Ahsoka Season 2, which is expected to be released later next year, is the only confirmed upcoming live-action show.
I can't wait for all the terrible leaks to come to fruition.
Even with animated shows, Star Wars seems to be taking a step back. Maul Shadow Lord is coming out in 2026, but that's the only major animated show in the works.
I forget most of the time that it actually exists.
Which is a huge change from what we have seen from Star Wars in the last decade.
So wait, is Star Wars gonna stop making TV shows?
Well, I think Disney is done just throwing money at these shows. Like when Disney Plus first started, they invested huge amounts of capital to build up a subscriber base.
You know, I think I'm gonna stop right here. The dude already made his point and is just focusing on suggestions for the future. So yeah, this guy falls into all the misconceptions and a lack of range that makes for a video that is painful to watch. I get really annoyed when people who think I should be putting more effort into expanding their range refuse to do so, and it's like talking to a brick wall. I want to spend my time talking with people who know the source material about all the content, both before and after the acquisition, and judge them all objectively. I get too many complaints that I just go after easy targets, but to be honest, who else am I supposed to go after? From what I've seen, anyone with my range shares a lot of the opinions I do about the Clone Wars, that it was a continuity and story nightmare that both destroyed the timeline and the thematic meaning of Star Wars, and anyone who opposes that viewpoint is far too obscure. I'd actually like to see ScreenCrush or Watch Mojo actually put the effort in and give me a challenge. But they're never going to do that. Some of the biggest potential voices on Star Wars, and they're ignorant on Star Wars. Further than that, I'd like someone to recognize that it's not just about retcons, and that the problem is far deeper than that. So with that being said, I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying that